Curriculum Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We have committee members Ms. Brooks and Ms. Gilliard, our liaison Dr. Feeney, and we have a special guest, Dr. Baer. We will be discussing restorative practices as we are using them in the district. We're really looking forward to all the progress that's been made in this area and what the plans are for the future. So please take it, Dr. Feeney.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to be here this morning. Both Dr. Baer and myself in our previous districts were trained in restorative practices. We were excited when we had an opportunity to bring these practices to the district. As we go through, I just want to point out that, and I've said this to a lot of the teachers, these practices, a lot of our teachers are doing them throughout the district. What this does as a system, however, it is making it a little more coherent. There's a level of consistency, and it's showing the research that supports some of these practices. So I'm going to switch over to our presentation. We'll continue. Later on, we're going to have some additional guests that will join us, and I'll introduce that when they arrive. There are a few quotes to begin our presentation to talk a little bit about framing restorative practices, the notion behind them, and I think there's a perception that people who are not familiar with restorative practices might have, but really this is about connecting a learning community, and we live in an increasingly disconnected world. This is something that can help ground students to each other, to the community, teachers, staff members, so we're very excited. A big part of this is children need to learn to take responsibility for their actions so they don't become adults believing that nothing is their fault. I think there are some people who are worried that that is the case with some folks, but restorative practices is about accountability, about recognizing your role within the community. So we're going to switch a little bit. Restorative practices is what you'll hear us talk about. This is the foundation of the larger term called restorative justice. That is the philosophy behind the practices. Restorative justice, it's a process of conflict resolution. It focuses on repairing harm caused by wrongdoing and in restoring the relationships that get broken in these cases. There's a recognition that harm causes injuries. Wrongdoing impacts people, it impacts relationships, and the community at large. So if I'm in a fight with somebody else, for example, that fight goes beyond, impacts more than just the two people involved in that fight, because it does impact the tone of the community. It impacts other people who might be scared because of the fight, and it changes the culture of the school. So it's really important when there is a wrongdoing that somehow there's action to help repair the community at large. Restorative justice believes that people are inherently good, that they're capable of positive change, that they're capable of growth. And restorative justice believes that you achieve justice through restoration. You look to repair harm, you look to rebuild the community, and that's really how justice is received. Some of the core principles.
Is that okay? Okay, sorry.
Some of the core principles of restorative practices, restorative justice, this notion of inclusion. You engage all stakeholders, and as indicated earlier, stakeholders are more than just the victim and the perpetrator, but also the community, and everyone gets engaged in the process. There's a whole school approach, and you elevate and equalize student voice. Student voice is really important. There's accountability. Offenders need to take responsibility for their actions. There's a focus on repairing harm, making amends. And it's not simply about punishing the person that caused the harm, but it's really repairing the harm that was done by a level of accountability towards the community. And it's about building relationships. The relationships are the key to any organization, any school, and making sure those relationships are strong, are repaired when inevitably they get strained a little bit, no matter what, family, school, whatever, our relationships get repaired and get strained a little bit. So how to address that and how to repair them, it's an important part of what gets taught in restorative justice. And helping students, in this case, understand the impact of their individual behavior on others as well as on the community. That is a critical part of this. There are different levels of restorative justice, sort of a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1's for everyone. You're setting a table, you're building a foundation. A lot of that circles with just sort of basic foundational, preventive, and proactive measures. That gets students, staff members, all comfortable with the process of restorative justice. So when things get a little more challenging, a little more heated, and you have to do a tier 2 or a tier 3 intervention, you have the language. You know what the process is, and that makes a world of difference. Tier 1 is about learning to walk before you learn to sort of jog and then run. And our emphasis right now as a district has really been tier 1. We've got to get people comfortable with it. So there's a little video where you're going to hear people talk a little bit about, these are some students where they've experienced it.
You're teaching a lesson and the student becomes disruptive. What do? Aside and have a brief conversation about why she's being disruptive, and then I would reteach my expectations. When I pulled the student to the side, you're teaching a lesson and the student becomes disruptive. What do? I would pull the student to the side and have a brief conversation about why she's being disruptive, and then I would reteach my expectations. When I pulled the student to the side and asked her what kept her from meeting my expectations, she would shrug her shoulders and avoid eye contact. The conversation I had hoped to have quickly became just a lecture.
Educators throughout New York are bringing restorative justice programs to their schools. Restorative justice is a process where participants are asked to consider their actions and take steps to resolve issues. In other words, if you make a mess, you clean it up. At its core, the process aims to repair relationships and get to the cause of why a problem happened in the first place. Rather than just punishing the offender, restorative justice focuses on righting wrongs. Two students who get into a scuffle in the hallway might be encouraged to talk it over, resulting in an apology and mediation with a professional and a peer. For more serious transgressions, the process might involve family members, coaches, teachers, or others who were affected by the student's actions.
We have a mantra called Circle Up. We discuss topics from race to curriculum to restoring relationships. Many times we do that to give students voice. We try to create opportunities for students to be able to speak their truth and be heard in a safe space.
There was this thing called recovery zone, and I used to get put into a recovery zone all the time. Then I would just get sent to the office. We had a recovery zone in the office. And then the teachers would not see that the other girls would be like bullying me, or they would just be disrespectful to me, so they didn't know why I was lashing out. So I feel like you're already judged when you come into the classroom, so it's easier to suspend someone when you already have that tension and hostility. Even if you do try to like get someone to talk to, it's not really someone who can relate to, like, you're in a struggle.
It offers a solution towards one of the biggest issues I've seen within the schooling system. It's that you take a kid who's having behavioral issues and remove them from the environment that they're having an issue in, and then bring them back in and not really understanding why that issue exists. Doing Circle Up and really seeing these reformative practices in action, I've realized that this isn't about how we can get rid of them, it's more so how can we help them so that way we can all be part of a functioning, collaborative environment to learn.
I'm surrounded by people who can listen to me also and listen to what I have to say, and you know, it just gives me a place to clear up my head, because this is like something I like to talk about. Just come in, say what I need to say, feel happy about what I'm saying, you know, being happy that I get to impact my school, and also having the support from my friends.
I think many of the students that participate in circles, it may be the first time that day that their voice has been heard.
The school feels a lot like home. Like you could come and be comfortable with everyone. A lot of times you might think somebody is one person out in the hall, but when they come in this room and they join a circle, they're the best version of themselves.
There's a bond that's now created in this circle, in this space, and you feel safe. And even if you don't feel safe inside of school, this room and this circle kind of fills that gap.
The restorative practices help a lot, and they help with respect a lot, because you know a lot of times you don't want to respect a teacher that kicks you out of their class, who forces you to get suspended. You're drawn to respect a teacher who actually sits down and has those discussions with you and show that they care.
Restorative justice has done a lot for this school, due to the fact that there's less kids getting suspended because people are taking the time to think about, why did that child act out? Why?
It help everybody differently in their own way. Me, personally, it's not always just come in here just because. I don't just come in here just because my attendance is bad. I come in because I feel like this is a safe place. You know what I'm saying? I would like for everybody to feel the same way. Because if school is a safe place, sometimes home isn't. And they come to school and they take it out on school, but if you can open up, you can express yourself, and you could actually talk to somebody about it, it would just change the trajectory of school, period. It wouldn't even be just learning. It'll be you learning. It'll be like having a mother and father in school that actually listens and pay attention. You're gonna wanna get up and get dressed to come to school every morning. Even though you don't like to wake up, you're gonna wanna wake up. You're gonna wanna put on clothes. You're gonna wanna get on your bus. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna wanna make it here every day, because now you got somebody to talk to. You got somebody that listens. You got somebody that understands you. And then being in the circle, everybody is opening up. So it's like you're looking at 10 other people that's just like you.
When a school operates under a restorative justice model, students are less likely to end up in the school-to-prison pipeline. The disparate impacts of suspensions and expulsions on minority students are reduced. Students feel like they're being heard, are more socially aware, and socially responsible. The repaired behavior is more permanent, and most importantly, students remain in the classroom and their education becomes more equitable.
Okay, a lot of wonderful stories there. The flow chart you heard on the video is discussion about restorative justice. You've heard us talk about restorative practices. These tools can be used both as prevention or intervention. We had seen the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 model earlier. It's sort of a flow chart that helps you decide where is it. And once again, we are focusing on the tier 1 at this point, where it's about prevention, helping to build those stronger relationships within our community. And these are the strategies we're employing down the road as we as a staff become more experienced, as our students and families become more aware and more experienced. It's when you start moving into the tier 2 and the tier 3 practices as well. Talk a little bit about New York State requirements. Dr. Bear will continue.
Thank you. So looking in January of 2000, this is when we really started the Academic Intervention Service. You may be familiar with the term AIS as a class that can be added at the high school and certainly in elementary and middle school. These would be those smaller group settings where you're focused on targeted skills to help students demonstrate that level of proficiency on a state test. We also at the high school do have a plus-based model for our mathematics and English courses where those AIS classes are really built into the structure. So those would meet as a 6x6. Looking at fast forwarding to October, this is when you started to hear RTI, response to intervention. So it wasn't just about that targeted academic support. You start looking more at the whole child and the whole class approach. So looking at closing those achievement gaps with those tiered interventions. So you saw that upside down triangle where tier 1 is really for everyone. This is more of the preventative, what are you doing in a classroom setting to help all students be successful and really do things that would be beneficial to every student. When you start looking at tiers 2 and 3, that's where you see the triangle narrow. So 2 would be starting to do some more specific interventions to help smaller groups of students, still can be done in a classroom setting. When you're looking at tier 3, it's really a small percentage of students who need very focused, maybe individualized interventions and supports. So fast forward to January of 2017, you start to hear a shift in the language again, that we're looking at the multi-tiered system of support. And I do feel like in all of our trainings that we are looking at our whole child approach. So this is where you're seeing what's happening outside with the student, you're looking for those cross-cutting skills, and really trying that team-based approach to make sure that we're meeting students' needs inside and outside of the classroom so they can really access learning. And you hear a bigger focus on the shift to school climate and students' overall well-being. Anything you want to add? So there is some crossover when we're talking about MTSS and restorative practices. So we really are focusing on prevention. We don't want the reactive approach where we see something happen, something didn't go well, and now we just want to put Band-Aids on it. We're looking to really support our students so they are achieving at the levels that they can. They are successful as the whole child approach. And it's a look at the bigger picture of how can we make all of our students be successful. Really looking at that relationship building. You did hear in the video that if a student is turned off to the classroom, they're not sitting there ready to learn. They are thinking about something else. They're trying to escape the classroom, whether you're talking about 20-minute bathroom visits or starting with some school-avoided behavior. So by building those relationships, it helps students be ready and willing to learn. Looking at that holistic approach, we are, again, focusing on that whole child. So it's not just, did you achieve on a state test? In order to be a successful adult, you need to be able to self-regulate, you need to be able to resolve conflicts with peers, problem solve, critical thinking. That's where you start to also hear that portrait of a graduate language. A big part of restorative is related to accountability. So if we are talking about something happened, a conflict happened in class, an undesired behavior was demonstrated, these approaches are not just about, well, you just say sorry and you move on. You're really looking at that deeper level of why are we doing this important work? Why is it important for you to learn this information? Why is it important for you to solve these social conflicts? How can we start to repair that harm? And there is a built-in accountability piece. And always with continuous monitoring, you've heard me speak about data so many times, and I'm always happy to talk about it again. We do continuously look at how students are performing in and outside of the classroom, and whether we're talking about the testing results, how they're achieving in a classroom, or you start to talk about how are they behaving, what is the behavior that you're seeing in a classroom, and really making sure that we're addressing needs and that what we are doing is working, because if it's not working, we need to try something else. Dr. Feeney was so excited about the animations on this slide. So here you can see that triangle again. So when we're talking about those tier 1 strategies, this is really to address every single person in your classroom, if you're a teacher, or from a building level, how we're really supporting the building. So this would be something applicable to every single student. So we're really looking to build a more positive school environment where students are feeling safe to enter the school. They're coming to school on a consistent basis, ready to learn. So that tier 2 is where we start to target some things that could be academic based, socially based, behaviorally based, or there are students who have emotional or mental health issues that we're really looking at that team approach to make sure that students have the supports that they need. Some of these can be administered in a classroom setting. Some of these might also be supported outside of the classroom. And you can see tier 3 is that smallest part of the triangle. This should be a small percentage of our students who really need that intensive focused support to get to the levels we need them, whether we're talking about from that social emotional standpoint or academic standpoint. And when we talk about how this works with restorative, it's the same thing. So tier 1, you could be building community circles that you'll experience in just a little bit, which would be applicable to everyone. Tier 2, it could be some minor infractions that happen and you're shifting to that restorative justice lens of, okay, so this is a conflict that happened in a classroom. This is a behavior that we observed in the cafeteria. Let's talk about what happened. What were you thinking when this happened? What are some of the ways that we can work on strategies? Tier 3, we could be talking about some of the most severe behavior that's happening in a school setting where you really want to talk about what was the harm done, whether it was directed at another person or it was something that did impact other people because they observed it, maybe they feel a little bit less safe. How can we really help the student re-enter the building successfully and making sure that they can go back into their social groups, have the strategies that they need. So this would be most serious behaviors that we're seeing. And at the bottom, you see both MTSS and restorative justice focus on preventing and addressing student needs at various levels of intervention. And then what do we need to do when we go to the next step? So if you look at these legislative measures, the Safe Schools Against Violence in Education, SAVE Act as it's known of 2000, it's really talking about those safety plans and the code of conduct, which as you know, we just revised at a district level. They emphasize those positive behavioral interventions and supports. So it's that shift from punitive, you did something wrong, here's your punishment, we never talk about it again and hope you don't exhibit the same behavior. So this was starting that shift to... I'm sorry?
Sorry, it's just like, and it also exhibits like, and we don't really care.
Right, it's slap on the wrist, you're done, let's move on, and you aren't addressing the underlying cause. And if the punitive measures worked exclusively, we wouldn't have the number of students getting detentions over and over again, in school suspension, out of school suspension. So this is when we were really seeing that shift to encouraging proactive measures to really prevent and fully address conflicts. Looking at DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act, again, we're looking at providing a safe and supportive environment, and it's addressing more specific behaviors like discrimination, harassment, and bullying. And this is another way that students were getting more direction in how to address some of these behaviors, as well as schools getting direction of which things that we're tracking as far as discrimination or bullying, harassment you might see in school, and it was trying to get a measure of what was happening, how we were addressing it, and providing that avenue for students and families who needed to report things happening. So looking, fast forward to the bottom, recommendations for reducing disparities in and reforming school discipline. So this is a recommendation for EdLaw to really transition from that punitive model to the proactive, developmentally appropriate. You can see in our code that there are some differences from elementary to middle school to high school because there are behaviors you might exhibit at an elementary school, while undesired, are developmentally appropriate. That same thing happening when someone is 15 is no longer developmentally appropriate. So you see that there's a different level of intervention in the way that we address it, but still talking about that restorative approach to make sure that we are looking at that underlying cause and not just dealing with what happened. Here you can see a guidance document, and it's really where we start to see the connection with social emotional learning and the approach to discipline. So if we are helping students to develop those skills, to interact with their peers for conflict resolution, for if you are frustrated in the moment and acting out, well, what are some ways that we can help self-regulate? So we look at how restorative practices are drawing on those SEL competencies, and they help students understand, well, what was I feeling in that moment? What did I do? What are some ways I could have dealt with this differently? And that's how you develop strategies. And instead of just simply, here's your consequence for what happened, that doesn't teach our students what they could have done differently. That tells them, we're mad at you, go over there, and then we'll deal with it later. This is also one of my favorite slides. So when you look at this approach, students, when they come to school, develop a number of skills, academic, social, and otherwise. When a baby is born, they do not know how to read. We teach children how to read. When a baby is born, they do not know how to do mathematics. We teach children how to do mathematics. When we encounter a student who doesn't know how to behave, they are not born knowing how to behave. We need to teach them how to behave. So this goes through that same education model. If we think it's important to teach our children knowledge, learning, and skills, this falls into that same category. We need to demonstrate and model what those interpersonal skills are and how students can really develop. If there is something egregious that happens in a school setting, one of the things I know I talk about, my principal colleagues do as well, This is not an action that defines you as a human being. This was a decision at one point in time. We worked through what happened, what could have been done differently, and how to work on this moving forward. And then it's everything now is how you recover. Every single person in this room has made a mistake in their life that they wish hadn't happened, but you have to find a way back from that. So if we help our children find their way back, they can come into the school community and learn better skills to deal with things that arise. So looking at traditional discipline, 11 million days. Just sit with that number for a minute. So students in the 2015-16 school year nationally lost 11 million days of instruction due to out-of-school suspensions. So if suspensions, out-of-school suspensions alone worked, that number wouldn't be this high. These are not 11 million separate days, separate incidents, individual children. These are people who are getting suspended for a large number of days and over again. So if you even look at the next bullet, just in New York State alone, students lost over 500,000 days due to out-of-school suspensions. So that was just in New York State. So clearly we need to find a better way to address what's happening in our schools. Looking at the traditional approach, you heard some of this language in the code of conduct. So traditional approach, you break a school rule, we are assigning blame, we have a guilty party, it's your fault. Accountability means you get a punishment. You are suspended out of school, and the person who may have been the victim of whatever happened doesn't have anything. They can't find out about what happened, they get no resolution, there's nothing to kind of close that loop. The rules are about falling in line, being compliant, and those punitive measures. And there's a limited opportunity to help someone really take ownership of what happened, not to shame them, but to just talk about, this is what happened, this was my role in it. Looking at the restorative approach, this is really built on relationships. So this is, okay, something happened, a school rule was broken. Well, what did that mean to the larger school community? Maybe it's a classroom, maybe it's the hallway, maybe it's the cafeteria, maybe it's interactions between individual students or a small group of students. And this is really about, let's talk about the core of what happened. When we see conflicts in schools, I know certainly at the high school, because of social media, phones, that one thing that happened at school, it is not really the reason that it happened. It's a build-up to maybe there was a fight in school that didn't just sporadically happen. So looking at, well, how did we get to this place? What has been happening along the way? Taking that accountability is really understanding what happened and who it harmed and how we can move forward together. So the person who really initiated what happened, and it's not always one person, it might be multiple people, can really go through the process of figuring out how they got to that place, finding those strategies that we had talked about before, and coming, whether it's writing a letter to the person who might have been on the other side, maybe doing a restorative circle, but there's something that says, I'm taking ownership of my part in this, I'm really sorry for what happened, here's how we can go through this together. And we're looking at repairing to go toward a positive outcome, and it gives a chance to make amends, because in our lives we have social conflicts with people. Yes, we can say stay away from each other, they don't need to be best friends anymore, but at some point you are crossing paths again, so you need to be able to be comfortable with, okay, something happened, we're not really friends anymore, but we can still coexist in the same place. And remember that there are friend groups involved as well, so it also helps settle friend groups down when we're talking about a social conflict.
Thank you. There's a lot of research that supports restorative practices, research that points to reduced suspensions, improved school climate, increased achievement, and stronger relationships. Those are all clickable links. This presentation will be available on our website. I'm not going to go through and show those studies, but this is research-backed positive outcomes. So what's happened here in Port Washington in terms of implementing? It really started last year over 4 days, 2 days in January, 2 days in February. where we had upwards of 25 teachers, administrators, parents, and students trained in restorative practices. These folks became essentially turnkey trainers. They got a 4-day course and they could go on and do training of others. As this was happening, we also started through the Board of Education Code of Conduct Committee a reworking of the Code of Conduct. 3 people in this room, Ms. Horowitz, Dr. Bear, myself, were part of that committee. As we worked through the Code of Conduct, these restorative practices were infused within it. So anyone who has read through the updated Code of Conduct, which was approved by the board in September, will hear this language and see this language. And our goal is to incorporate this more and more in our schools. At our Superintendent's Conference Day on the 5th of November, we gave just about all of our teachers a restorative experience. They went through, had a restorative circle, and that's the best way to get a sense of what this is all about. And I suspect there are people in this room shortly who will experience a restorative circle. I'm going to put money on that, so brace yourselves. That's right. No, you can't leave. It's too late to leave. Doors are all locked. So we also have started training the next cohort of staff members. That actually finished yesterday. We had 2 cohorts of 25 people each in a 2-day condensed version of the restorative justice training. Rave reviews. People were so excited about this, and this is, once again, get that out to more. You can see in this presentation in the background, that's Adele Brevard, who's been our trainer for our restorative practices. She's a nationally recognized trainer, travels all about doing this work with schools. So now the highlight of the meeting is enough talk. Let's have some action. We are very lucky to have our colleagues from the Daly School. We have our principal, Ms. LaGuardia. We have our social worker, Ms. Horowitz, and one of our wonderful experienced teachers, Ms. Christ, joining us. And I want to point out, once again, these are things, teachers have been doing this, and I'm sure we'll speak a little more about that, but this just puts some coherence behind what's being done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. If you want to go through, and when you get ready to do the circle itself, we'll turn off the presentation and put the camera back on the audience.
Okay.
So just let me know.
All right, great.
Do you want me to go through the slides and you
Sure,
start?
you can do them, you can do them.
I can do that.
All right, so I'm Lucille LaGuardia, I'm the principal at Daly, right upstairs. This is very convenient for us. And when Dr. Feeney invited us to be trained in restorative justice and the circles, I was all in. So Casey Horowitz, our counselor, and I were trained last year, and now we have a new cohort from Daly that's being trained this year. And we love using restorative justice and circles at Daly. It really fits well with the ruler program as well, which all the elementary schools and Weber use as well. What we're finding is that I think that Katie also talked about this too. It makes you think about your emotions and regulating your emotions. So we are going to experience a circle in just a minute, but before I do that, I'm going to ask my colleagues, Casey and Elise, just to talk a minute or two about how they've used circles. I'm going to start with Elise because this is a fun story. This was something that happened at Daly last year, and this is sort of like, because we talked a lot about, you're thinking about high school kids and things that they do, but you know, the little ones do things too, and they need consequences sometimes, but really they also need to be taught and to think about what they're going to do next time and how we can come back into join the community. So Elise, do you want to share a little bit about what happened last year?
Sure.
And I put the camera feed on. So
I was just going to say.
So exciting.
Everyone can listen. So hi everyone, I'm Elise Christ. I teach 3rd grade at Daly. I use circles in many ways. We do them in the morning, we do them for, the inclusive process, welcoming everyone in, lots of different reasons. Last year, I had a class that we had a student who was very taken by phallic symbols, and he would talk about them, he would draw them, and he would get other people to draw them, and then he would draw them in other classes, and, you know, various times asking the child not to draw them, not to talk about them.
Those of you that have boys might be nodding.
Yes, I have a son, so, you know, listen, we all, and I'm very, you know, you don't know me, but the three of us here are probably the most pro SEL circle-related people you'll meet. So my voice is usually, we shouldn't be doing that, and, you know, let's not do that. But we all get to the moment where if it's not working and they're not listening, it can be very frustrating. So then eventually I brought Mrs. Horowitz in on it, and you know, this child was difficult. He really couldn't stop, and it led to some touching, you know, some nudging on the line to the girls and trying to touch, you know, pushing them in private parts and all of these different things. It was happening in art, and he was getting other children involved. Other boys were starting to do these things, and they would draw things that looked like regular pictures, but then if you looked closely, that phallic symbol was in that picture. So I was so frustrated, and I went to Mrs. Horowitz and Miss LaGuardia, and I was so annoyed. He needs a consequence. He needs this. He needs that. I was flipping out. These two come to me. I think we should do a restorative circle. Well, could you just imagine? A what? They wanted to sit down, sit in this circle. I wanted to kill him. Okay? So I'm thinking, like, how is this going to help him? You know, we're going to sit down, right? So the restorative justice, so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because the slide where you talk about the difference between the traditional and the restorative justice, part of the restorative justice is Mrs. Horowitz pulls the child out first, is talking to him. We ask a lot of questions. We talked a lot about, I had also spoken to this child in a very serious manner. Did anything happen to you? You know, you went to sleepaway camp, I was very serious. You know, I have to protect you. Why are you doing this? All of those things. Mrs. Horowitz had similar conversations. Before we went into the circle in the class, so let me say that the other children, it started as laughing and giggling, but then the children slowly started to come to me in little groups. This is uncomfortable. This needs to stop. I don't like that the boys are doing this. And then it slowly led to parents contacting me that even the boys that were participating, some of them didn't want to participate, but didn't know how to get out. Mm-hmm. So the whole class was essentially harmed, if you will. I didn't see it that way, but I see it now. So then part of the restorative approach was Mrs. Horowitz having this child out in the hall and explaining to him, and she'll speak to that when we do have this circle, to explain to him what was going to happen first, that he knew he wasn't in trouble, and the point of the circle. Why are we doing this? And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that first.
Yeah. So part of because Mrs. Kreis uses circles in her classroom so regularly at that tier 1 level, it was easy for us to move into a restorative circle at that level 2. If it was a classroom that didn't have that established, this would have been a little bit more challenging, but they were already comfortable with the process of the circle. So I spoke to the primary kids who were involved in it and explained what the circle was going to look like and feel like. I asked them if they wanted to participate in it because they didn't have to participate in it. It could have been something that we repaired the harm and then in a smaller way kind of allowed him the opportunity to reconnect and reestablish and apologize and take accountability and all of that. They did, all the kids actually chose to partake in it.
Because there was a leader and then there were some other, he lured others in.
Right. And so all the kids decided to take care of it. So I just kind of prepared him for what it might look like, what it might feel like, the opportunity to pass, which we will talk about, that he didn't have to share. And none of the prompts that we used in the circle were directly directed at him. It was more like, when there is art about, you know, that includes phallic symbols, or when this happens at recess, or when this happens online, how does it make you feel, you know, things like that. Because it wasn't just one child. So I wanted them to understand that this wasn't going to be directed at them or embarrassed. And, you know, he came into the circle. It's again, luckily we have these nice relationships. So he sat next to me. I think that helped him feel like, you know, he had an ally in the circle. There was a lot of pre-work that we kind of had to put into place to make sure that this was successful.
Right, so were you there?
Yeah, because now you're moving into tier 2. So there was already tier 1 circles going on in the classroom, but now we're talking about restorative tier 2.
Right.
So the two of them were in the circle, I was there, so we were all a part of the circle. And then, so the kids knew, like, okay, this is like an elevated circle.
Right.
And then Mrs. Horowitz opened it up. This is going to be a different kind of circle. We're coming together. Something's happened and we want to talk about it. And the questions were geared towards, you know, more like, when this happens during recess, how does it make you feel? And you'll see what a circle is like in a moment. But the kids, first of all, I was blown away at the honesty of the responses from the kids, including some of the boys who were involved. Okay, how does it make you feel? Uncomfortable, nauseous, you know, queasy, and then, you know, I can't remember some of the questions.
Some of the kids actually verbalized things that we knew were true from their parents, so they actually shared, like, I didn't really want to do it, but I also
didn't know how to
not do it. A couple of kids passed in some of the early rounds and then shared in the final rounds with how they felt. The final question was just, please share, you know, how do you feel after all of these conversations, exiting the circle? And they actually said they felt, you know, it was relieved, calmer, more relaxed, more comfortable. Safe. There was a lot of safe.
And it never happened again.
So there wasn't a suspension.
There wasn't a suspension, but also there wasn't a discomfort in the class. Like it was very much of a reuniting where they all kind of had that opportunity to share how they felt. Some kids, you know, said, I feel fine. Like some kids were just neutral about it.
It also allowed the student to witness what was happening as a result of his behavior, and in a very non-threatening way, so he could take that in. He was a very bright child, so it allowed him to see, like, understand the harm, right? So, because he probably didn't, which we don't take time to think about that when we're annoyed and we just say, like, oh my God, this kid doesn't get it, you're suspended.
Yeah, right.
You know? And so in that moment, he could just sit there and say, oh wow, look, she's uncomfortable and I really like her and he's my friend. I didn't realize that he didn't want to do it. He was just all of this happened and everybody took it in, and then everyone was friends again, and you know, it just moved on. And I mean, I was lit up, the whole class was lit up, and he stopped doing it, and I can't say enough about it. I was freaking out about it. And Dr. Feeney came to one of our faculty meetings, and I was just flipping out, telling the whole staff. And it was just, because to me, it was third graders, and all they wanted to do was just talk about phallic symbols. And I just didn't know what we were gonna do. I thought we were over. I was like, how are we gonna handle this? And here we were.
I think Ms. Kreis was feeling discouraged in herself because she spends a lot of time in her classroom establishing norms and creating this safe space and this open conversation.
And STL and circles.
And so for one of her children to be doing this, and for that, you know, for her to get to the point where she was like, this kid needs a consequence, is actually, like, you know, unheard of for her. Right, she had really gotten pushed to like another level, and so.
And I think another layer too, and to be honest, was that I didn't really have a full backing from the family. They didn't feel that it was that big of a deal. They felt like, kids explore, he's okay, we've spoken to him. That was hard. So when you
felt like we had at the school, we had to
do right. So it was, you know, and accountability.
Yeah.
So I think what this is saying, and when I was listening to you, is yes, parents do have to teach their children at home, but we have to teach them too.
And I also think it was that opportunity. It's like that other slide where it says, I love that slide, where it's like, we punish them if they don't behave. because this was really an opportunity to, he wasn't behaving and we were trying to teach him why it's important to behave and why people have boundaries and to respect those boundaries and all of that. And it wasn't punitive or exclusive, you know, excluding him from the classroom. It was actually bringing them into the classroom and making sure that he was part of the community.
Especially because it happened here.
Right.
And we want him to have his friends, and we want him to be accepted because he's a good kid, and we want to see the good.
Right.
So, all right.
Amazing.
Excellent.
Right.
So I think
do
this
it?
would be a good time.
This would be a good time?
to,
Okay.
um,
So if you all want to just stand for a minute, because I'm going to ask you to come to a circle, which will mean probably we'll have to spread our chairs a little bit.
You need these slides to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
you
set
can
the
keep
norms.
that one on for a minute.
Are you talking about just the inner circle?
No, you're in. Yeah, you're in. No, you're coming.
That's a nice try over there.
Maybe we'll push the chairs out or in, I don't know.
Push him in.
Yeah.
Push him in? Okay.
But
That's right, everyone's in it.
But if you would like to have a seat, if it's uncomfortable for you to stand, I really would, I want you to be comfortable, so whatever feels good. But we do need to be in a circle, okay? All right. Come closer. Okay, great.
The table could be in between
Okay,
us.
so the guidelines are up there, I'm not gonna go through them, I think we're really gonna feel the circle as we experience it. But the idea of it being shared, the idea of we're speaking honestly from our heart, what stays in the circle, what's said in the circle stays in the circle.
Mine's three too.
Oh, there you go. Excellent. Well, everybody's here.
Just us and anyone who can watch it on YouTube.
I'll keep it G-rated.
Please do.
Is that for a doubt?
So we'll be good.
Well, we were talking about phallic symbols.
That's true. Okay, so something important that we do is get ourselves in the moment. So we're gonna take some nice deep breaths. So what we tell our kids to do a lot of times is pretend that you're breathing and you're smelling a rose or one of your favorite flowers. So you take a nice deep breath in and blow it out like you're blowing a candle. And take another nice deep breath in and blow it out. And another nice deep breath in and blow it out. That feels so good. There is a picture of our entire school in the gym doing these mindful breaths. It's pretty amazing. Dr. Feeney might share it with us. I'm sorry to jump around, but yeah. So it's like, it's hard for me to close my eyes when they're doing that because I love seeing them, but it's awesome. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the talking piece, which is what we use in circles. And this is important because whoever's holding it is the person that's talking. The talking piece can be something significant. For me, this is my talking piece is something that my kids bought for me when they were visiting their dad in California. And they don't usually buy things for me, so that's significant. And then the other piece.
Don't break it.
Yeah, well, I know my teachers are always afraid of breaking it. The other thing is that it makes me think of them even when they're far away. So that's the significance for me in this talking piece. We have some ground rules. So we already talked about if you don't have the talking piece, you are listening. I'd like for you to speak honestly and from the heart. We use respectful words that are not offensive. While everyone is encouraged to speak, you definitely can pass if you would like to pass. And what's said in the circle stays in the circle. Can I just see a thumbs up if everyone agrees to those rules? Awesome. Okay. So we have some holidays coming up. So this first prompt is pretty easy, and it's to think about, and it also makes me hungry, think about your a nice celebration food that you love. And if you could just tell us about that food, maybe there's something around it. So I'm gonna start, and the food I'm thinking about, they're cookies called alfajores. And they are kind of like Oreos, but made with dulce de leche inside and a vanilla wafer instead of a chocolate wafer. And my mom used to make them, she still does, at Christmas time. And when I was younger, we would get one, like 10 of them each to bring to our favorite teacher.
I just really love Haagen-Dazs vanilla chocolate chip ice cream. So if you want to bring it, you can.
We could also just, normally we would have names, just if we could all introduce ourselves as well. I'm so sorry.
Skip that one.
Yeah. Forgive me. I didn't have the total name, so I
Can
should
you say your,
You were
can
gonna
you
do
say
your
your name and then your favorite, or your celebration food?
I'm Elise Christ, and I love vanilla chip Haagen-Dazs.
I'm Krista, and our celebratory food is we get like an 8 or 10 foot sandwich for birthdays when we were kids, and now my son's birthday is January 2nd, and we always get the big sandwich. Hi, I'm Denise. Christmas time, I usually make cream cheese cookies, and everyone likes those, so I guess I'll go with that.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I always look forward on Christmas and hope that my dad will make his tiramisu. I'm Jessica. I always look forward to latkes around the holidays, but not necessarily at Hanukkah because my family eats them at Thanksgiving because everybody loves them so much. And I always make them using my great-grandmother's recipe on the original page that my mother Xeroxed for me. So it's a very meaningful exercise at a time that's festive.
Hi, my name is Rose, and for every holiday, what we always have is a very special dessert, which is molten lava cake. And we look forward to that.
Hi, my name is Deborah. This is very hard for me because my husband makes all of our holidays, and he's an amazing cook, if anybody's been to our house and sampled some of it. So it's really, really hard. So I'm just going to stay away from what he cooks because I can't pick anything. I'm going to say during Passover, we have a special matzah called shmora matzah that we get directly from Brooklyn. And it's unlike anything you've ever eaten. It's just delicious, and I try to eat it all year round, except we run out of it, so that's what I will say. It's a special kind of, sorry. It's a handmade matzah, and it's specially washed, so.
I'm Rachel. Since Thanksgiving's the holiday coming up, I'm gonna go with a Thanksgiving food. In our house, it's candied acorn squash instead of sweet potatoes, because that's what my father made for every Thanksgiving for my whole life, and it's a little more unusual. And as candied sweet potatoes are always swimming in butter and sugar, acorn squash gives you that little pool in the middle that is actually full of butter and sugar. So I think from a kid perspective, it's actually even more exciting, even though my kids now all manage to tell me they need additional sugar because they've run out. So it's mostly a sugar and butter dish with acorn squash.
Hi, I'm Nanette. Thanksgiving's my favorite holiday of the year, so I'm looking forward to next week. And the favorite side dish in our house is stuffing.
Thank you. I'm Sean. Independent of Thanksgiving, my kids have already laid out the menu they want for Thanksgiving, but one of my favorite meals, which can happen throughout the year, is lasagna. My kids love lasagna. And what I love about it is when I was a young kid, I loved my mother's lasagna. So being able to share, that dish with my kids, it connects me to my mom, and then they're connected to me.
My name is Victoria, and one of our celebratory dishes is fettuccine Alfredo. Before my dad passed, he showed me how to make all his dishes from scratch. So even the pasta, I make the pasta from scratch. So I do that every Christmas now.
Hi, Juanita. So during Thanksgiving, I eat all the things that I don't normally eat. One being baked macaroni and cheese. So I try not to eat cheese during the year for the most part, so I kind of go overboard then.
My name is Katie, and one of my favorite things and celebratory things is my mother-in-law's noodle pudding. And I've never had any that is as good as hers, and I'm so excited that at Thanksgiving that my husband's cousin will be making her noodle pudding, and we can all think of her.
Thank you. My name is Sandra. So I'm recently 2 years in being vegan.
and I have ruined all holidays. So it is always an issue now. And Thanksgiving's coming up, and it's probably the worst one because my mom always enjoyed making the turkey the same way her father made it. And reason is because I always ensured that it was the same way. There's like very specific things. So she's extremely disappointed. However, I'm still going to ensure that it's like made the right way, even though I won't eat it. So I don't have a favorite food anymore. I literally have ruined like all the holidays. I've been told multiple times.
I guess because Thanksgiving's around the corner, I'm gonna go with my aunt's butternut squash soup. She always hosted Thanksgiving my whole childhood, and she's a very good cook. She always made that soup, and now she's in California, so since she moved, I took over making the soup and hosting Thanksgiving. So everybody always is looking forward to the soup, and it's very delicious.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to summarize a little bit. I really appreciate everybody listening while you were sharing, the ones that were holding the talking piece. I think everyone did a great job with that. This hearing about everybody's food, it does always make me hungry, but I love that food, it's not just food, it's usually connected to a memory. So that was very nice to hear. I hope that you also enjoyed that. I'm gonna do one more round, and this is a little bit, maybe it has a little bit more of a story. Here we go. We're going to share a story about your name. It could just be that's why you were named, the name that you have, but you can think about your name, share again your name, and maybe there's a story behind it. So I'm gonna start, and this time we'll go this way. So my name is Lucia, and my aunt's name is Lucia, so we reuse names a lot in our family. I did not like my name growing up because it's always mispronounced. Lucia, 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 all the different ways. But now I like it because it's unique and it means light.
My name is Casey. I'm the youngest in my family. We are all C's, so it was Cece, Carrie, Craig, and Casey. I also did not like my name growing up because it was only boys and dogs. I was like the only girl, Casey. So I used to lie and say that my real name was Cassandra and that Casey was a nickname and to stop calling me it. And my mom would get really upset with me about that. But now, like Lucia, I like it because it's more unique. And I guess I'm more comfortable with myself and being, not minding if other dogs, there are still dogs and boys. I'm okay with that.
So Sandra, my mother is Sandra also, so I'm very honored to have her name. And I have an older sister who didn't get it, so I was the honor. Wow.
My full name is actually Catherine, 2 syllables, very important. So when I was born, my grandmother, who is Catherine with a C, was very displeased that my mother changed the spelling and the number of syllables, and she is the reason I'm a rebel without a cause.
Juanita, so same, I didn't like my name growing up. It generally was the name of older women. It wasn't the name of younger people. Most of the time, if I met someone with my name, they were older. I had a slightly older cousin with my name as well. But it just, I felt dated at such a young age. And then as I got older, it didn't really change much, but I'm okay with it now.
So my name is Victoria. My middle name is Angelina. I was named after my dad, whose name is Victor, and my grandmother, who was Angelina. So my mom had no say at all in my name.
My name is Sean. S-E-A-N. That was not a very common name back in the 60s and 70s, so it was unique when I was in school. Teachers mispronounced it all the time. It didn't bother me too much, but it did give me a sense that this is a different name.
My name is Nanette. I got it. I'm named after my aunt. It's
also mispronounced or misheard very, very often. So I intentionally named my 3 children very, very traditional names, so that does not happen to them.
So since we're all doing angsty name stories, so my first name is Rachel, which was my mother's favorite name. I didn't have any strong hatred feelings towards it now or then, but my middle name, because I was born in the 70s, is my mother's maiden name because she was really a feminist and a hippie and was at Woodstock, but it was also the 70s, and so she snuck her maiden name in by making it my middle name. And throughout my childhood, I hated it because everybody else's middle name was like a normal middle name, like Jane. And my hidden middle name under the R was Rosenblatt. And so I just never said my middle name. And I kind of, like in college, somebody asked me, what's your middle name? What does the R stand for? And I said, it's my middle name. And the friend said to me, obviously, what does it stand for? And I said Rosenblatt, and he was like, it's my middle name was better. So, but then I grew up, and moving into adulthood and then moving into parenthood, I realized that names have more than just we've stuck a name we like on somebody, and that it's nice to have them have deeper meaning, and they're actually kind of a connection to the past. So I'm completely fine with it now. By the time I graduated college, I actually requested that they put the whole thing on my diploma because I knew it was going to mean so much to my mom. So all my correspondence from my college from then on has all 3 names on it because, you know, once you tell them to do something, they can't undo it. And I realized that connection to the past was so important that I actually stuck my middle name on my maiden name on my kids, and they're hyphenated. They have both names. My mom made a hard play for their middle names to all be Rosenblatt, and
Knowing your mom,
right? Everyone who knows my mom would understand she would be opinionated.
So in traditional Jewish fashion, I'm named after somebody who was beloved, who had passed away. My name was going to be Naomi, who was my maternal grandmother, who I never knew. She passed away when my mother was quite young, and my mother couldn't bring me, the pain was so hard, was so deep for her. She couldn't bear to call me Naomi every day, so instead they named me Deborah. And I don't know why Deborah, they just liked it because my middle name is Naomi, so it flows. I love my name, I've always loved my name, Deborah Naomi. Tell my mother all the time how much I love my name. And somewhere around, and I've always been known as Deborah, except for when I got to 2nd grade when Ms. Barnes decided to call me Debbie, which then stuck. And anybody who knows me knows I cannot, for me, you can call me Samantha. I'll be much happier than calling me Debbie. Deb, and Debbie do, that's fine, but just Debbie. And so whenever anybody says, hi, Debbie, I know that they knew me from the time that I was in 2nd grade until I graduated high school. And as soon as I got to college, anybody who called me Debbie, I'd say, my name is Deborah. And I do that to this day. In fact, there was somebody in Port Washington who, when they met me, and I was in my 50s, called me Debbie. And I said, my name is Deborah.
Thank you. My name is Rose, and I'm in a traditional Italian family, or usually the firstborn is named after the paternal grandparent. So my grandmother was Rose, and I like my name because I loved my grandmother. She died in her 90s, and she came in 1901 to this, no, she was born in 1901, and she came to the United States in the 20s. So I grew up with my grandmother, and she had so many stories that we shared together, and so my name just reminds me of my grandmother, and I'm very grateful, thankful for her.
My name is Jessica. I was not named after anybody. My parents, along with every other parent that year, as far as I can tell, just really liked the name Jessica. So my whole life growing up, I was just Jessica K, because my last name started with a K, Jessica K. I too, the only name I cannot be called is Jessie, and it's nothing against the name Jessie, but I love the name Jessie, but it's not my name, so people call me all kinds of things. going through college, nobody ever called me Jessica. I haven't actually been called Jessica in a very long time, so now most people call me Jess. I don't know when that started, but now it is, and I think it's helpful, especially in this town where lots of other people are named Jessica, that we have different Jessicas. Jessica.
What she said. Okay. My name is also Jessica. You know, my mom names me Jessica because she thought that Jennifer was too popular. But now same. I was Jessica P growing up because there was always another Jessica. There were 3 Jessicas on my college floor freshman year. I had a little reprieve until I moved to Port Washington, and now I cannot go to any kinds of large or medium-sized group gathering without there being another Jessica. So I don't really feel very connected to my name. Growing up, everyone called me and my family Jay, and then I moved when I was in high school, and everyone started calling me Jess, except for my 9th grade gym teacher who called me Jessie. So ever since then, I hated being called Jessie, and no one calls me Jessie. So I don't know, I always sign my emails Jessica, and even then people say, oh, can I call you Jess, do you mind? And I was like, what do you want? Just call me whatever you want.
Hi, I'm Denise, and I don't really have any strong feeling about my name. I have always sort of liked my name. My maiden name is Giselle, so I was always DD. So I really went by DD a lot, and that's like what most of my family calls me. I have a sister-in-law named Denise also, so she's Denise and I'm DD, so it sort of works. And I'm not named after anyone. My parents like to sort of choose names that just were unique to their own children, and I continue that tradition with my own children. I have 4 kids, and when we were naming them, it was always like, well, we can name them this after this person. And my feeling always was that they were a unique person, and they were new to the universe, and they sort of should have their own name and forge their own path. So none of my kids are named after anyone either.
My name's Krista with a K, and I hated my name growing up because before crickets, you couldn't get anything with the name Krista on it, especially spelled with a K. So I made sure to name my kids characters from literature, so they have books with their name on it, movie characters and all that.
That's very funny. I am Elise, E-L-I-S-E, so I was Elsie for most of my childhood. That was horrific. Every time they took attendance, Elsie, nope, not here. Elise is here. Elsie the cow was like a big, thing when we were growing up. But I did love that no one had my name. It was very unique. So I didn't meet another Elise until I was about 8 or 9. We were in Florida on a trip, and that was super exciting. I remember running to my mom, her name is Elise. And my nickname in my family is Lucy. And I don't know, my mom just started calling me Lucy, so my nephews and my niece call me Lulu. And then we recently found out that the reason I was Lucy is because I reminded my mom of Lucille Ball. I'll let you decide what.
So, just sort of wrapping up this one, I feel like just that simple question, what's in a name? There's lots of stories behind it. It's really a nice activity, a nice circle to do with classrooms, with staff. You learn a lot about people, feel that connection. This is our last circle. I know you're upset. But looking at the time, we've gone over. So our last circle is just, if you can just think about one word, just your feeling word right now. So my word is hopeful.
Happy.
Sleepy. Calm.
Tired.
Connected. Pensive.
Excited.
Grateful.
Excited.
Energized. Tired.
I'm also energized. Good choice.
Sorry, I'm tired.
Connected.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Nice job. Hope you liked it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will leave on this. When students feel supported and successful in the classroom, they rarely act out. When teachers feel supported and successful in school, they rarely burn out. These practices help our staff, they help our students, they help our community. So I want to thank certainly Dr. Bear, as well as our daily crew, Ms. McGuire, Ms. Horowitz, and Ms. Price. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was
Open for questions.
Wonderful experience to be a part of. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving to you. At this point, we usually open it up to board members for questions or comments, so please.
I have one question before you walk away, if you don't mind. I know you said that parents were not, fully bought in to it being a problem. How did they feel about the circle and
Great. Absolutely great, and fully on board with anything that I would do. I think it was more, it wasn't that they weren't on board, I just don't know that they took it as seriously. Do you know what I mean?
They didn't understand the impact it was having.
Correct.
They were looking at it like, because he would say he was being silly or it was supposed to be funny, and I think they had even had some instances with it at home, but they weren't understanding how upsetting it was to some of the other kids.
Right, so, it was the impact and, the concerns that we were having, and they were absolutely talking to him about it. It wasn't like, oh, come on, but I agree, the impact. And anything I wanted to do, they were on board. It was just, we weren't necessarily on the same page in terms of the impact. And once the circles were done and everything, as long as he was happy, they were happy.
Do you feel like they learned anything from the circle?
Parents or the parents?
The parents.
I don't know if they were aware enough, of what we were doing. That's a great question.
I think that they knew that the problem had been going on for a while. Like there had been multiple calls home about it. Like it happened in art, so the art teacher called home, and so they were aware that the circle was ultimately really the changing point. And so for that, I think they were grateful.
Yeah, they were very grateful, and there was follow-up post the circle to make sure that it was remaining okay. So they were, grateful. I don't know if there was enough information, like this is so informative. Now we're first rolling this out. This was still like me really I've always been involved in this, even before. It wasn't maybe called restorative practices, but it was something else that I've just done. I don't know if people knew enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the framework on my question is, I feel like as an elementary school parent, Ruler had an impact on our household because of the repercussion effects, and I can see that here being a potential, although also there are a million things that happen in school every day that are to the benefit of the kids that parents aren't totally paying attention to. Even if they feel the repercussions of it, they don't really understand or realize that's where it's coming from.
I think that's where like this type of a parent presentation about it is helpful, so that they can understand, because we're doing tier 1 circles all the time in elementary school, like by either me pushing in or classroom teachers using them. And so they're getting that benefit of like equality and listening. And, for elementary students, there's a lot of social skills that come from that. Waiting, impulse control, self-control, there's a lot, having a thought and not being able to share it, only having to share one, being able to share one of the very many ideas you might have in your head. So we're using it for all of those benefits also. Starting in kindergarten, they're doing circles. And they look obviously very different. It's not that type of a restorative circle, but it's all of those other circle benefits that the kids are growing from.
I also think it's a fair question though now that if something like this were to happen, when you have a conference with parents, it's fair to sit down and explain exactly what we did so that they do understand more.
I have one other question. So as a board, some of us had a committee meeting on restorative practices in 2018 or 2019, and I'm pretty sure it was actually in the policy committee, not in curriculum, and I feel like that alone actually tells you like where we as a board and administration were on restorative practices. It was very new. We had a philosophical discussion about it. We talked about it vis-a-vis the code of conduct, but there was no actual action steps, right? It was a really interesting meeting that didn't do anybody outside of that room very much good, and it wasn't ready to be rolled out. So I'm very excited to see like the practical effect of it, because I've been sold on it for a while. I think the toughest thing in terms of convincing other people about it and getting parents and community and all the teachers and all the administrators on board with it is, I think, this leftover idea that like there's some stuff that's just like so severe, like, well, that has to be punished, right? So anticipating that response, right? Occasionally we have something that happens that feels very severe, which I know you've dealt with at the high school with this kind of practice. What's the response to that? And is there anything that is so severe that it can't be dealt with this way?
And this is a misperception, right? This does not mean there's no case where a student may be suspended.
Right.
Not at all. This is not about a pat on the back and a lollipop and, hey, that's a nice chat.
Right, I think that's what some people.
Right, but
It's
it
not a
is.
soft approach.
Not at all. And in many ways, this is more challenging. Because you are trying to get to the root of the issue. So there are cases certainly that warrant a suspension. But even in those cases, okay, so if the student is suspended, what are you going to do to make sure that there's some learning that's been behind that? Because removing the child, sometimes, something so egregious, hey, you need a timeout, go sit in the steps for however, just take a few days. But you've got to reintegrate that student or those students back into the community, and that's critical work. So they go side by side. This is not the elimination of suspensions. This is not, we will never suspend anyone. But this does speak to, hey, maybe 500,000 suspension days in New York State is a bit much, and maybe we can reduce that a little bit, right?
And if I can jump in as well, even now we're pairing these together. So it's not just you did this wrong. We're working through these conversations of tell me what happened, tell me the role, tell me, and really having great conversations with students. So even if we are to the point of an out of school suspension, it's conversations with the student and with their parents to say, this is what happened. And we're modeling that language for families as well, so they can hear how to have a productive conversation at home. I mean, think of yourself in that position, getting the phone call that your child is being suspended out of school. You come in and meet with the school, and they're showing you how to take that temperature down so you can really engage in a better conversation with your children at home. And then even that reentry meeting when they come back is so important, because you come back to school, the student had time to reflect, great conversations, worked with social worker, administration, whatever the case may be, and then you have a kid go, you were suspended, what happened? And now it's re-triggering. So what are some of the strategies where we can really support the kids? Plus, if you've tried to speak with a teenager who wants to shut down and does not want to talk to you, this is not an easy, quick conversation where they can just give you fine, nothing. We are delving deeper, and that's not enough. So when we are really asking these questions and getting them to dig deep, that is significant.
And you're also helping parents talk to their children. Because I'm thinking of my husband right now getting a phone call that my kid was suspended. He'd want to blow. So blowing on the kid's not going to help. So if you have that parent, like she said, you're bringing the temperature down, and then you're modeling, how can, okay, you're upset, but how can we talk to them to find out what happened, and they're getting the consequence. We're not giving, if it's really bad, you're not getting them off the hook for that, but you're also helping them.
And the other powerful point that we can't repeat enough is with all these conversations, weaving in the impact on the community. Right? This isn't just about you being funny and choosing to draw this or that, so on and so forth. How is it impacting the community? Because, listen, we all live in our clueless bubbles at times. And sometimes, often these kids don't know what the impact is. So being able to frame that discussion about the action, the infraction, into, hey, you're not just impacting this person, or you're not just doing something what you think is funny. This is impacting our learning community, whether it's the classroom, the grade, or the school, depending on. And that's really important way to frame it.
And it changes the way the the suspension or consequence conversation sounds. Like, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have, it actually, but it just changes it to a more restorative conversation. The questions that you ask, the phrasing that you use, like, it creates a lot more accountability and empathy for the people that were impacted by it.
And then my line to that parent would be, and I'm so, in a weird way, I'm so grateful that that happened for him now.
Yeah.
Because maybe we've prevented something far worse later, because now he actually had an opportunity to see that he does impact others.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not gonna be so much worse than something in high school or college where he's, in jail, whatever it may be,
So what I'm hearing is that restorative happens before, depending on the situation, a restorative practice will happen before something in response to something happening that hasn't reached suspension level.
It can.
As in the.
Like the third grader, right?
Third grader, but also
Alongside.
afterwards.
Well, that tier one is really where you're building the capacity. So if you think about, as Dr. Feeney said, he and I both implemented restorative practices in our prior districts. So you build that capacity, you build that muscle to engage in difficult conversations, because if your first restorative circle was in response to an event that happened, the kids don't know how to do that yet. So when you are establishing those community norms, you're really building up the culture, you're showing students what it's like to talk, to open up, to put their voice in a room before the stakes are that high.
What we just did now is tier one today. That's just the comfort. Then the repair harm could be like what I said, but it could also be alongside something much bigger. Yes, you're gonna have to be suspended, but let's talk about why. And then when you come back, let's have a circle like I described to help them re-enter.
And I take suspensions, we all take suspensions really seriously, but I consider all of our 1,650-ish students as part of my family. So if your child does something wrong, you're not like, get out of the house, come back in 5 days. That's a really big deal to me to say, I shun you, you're banned from this building. So when we talk about really making the student feel connected and say, listen, there are times when there are consequences for our actions, and that's what's happening. However, we care about you. We want you to be a part of this community. We're going to give you some things we want you to kind of go over for a few days. We're going to help your parents have these conversations with you. And then we want you to come back in ready to learn and ready to rejoin this community. So it frames an out-of-school suspension differently than, I don't want to see you for 5 days.
Right.
How do you think that feels as a student who did something wrong? Yes, they made a bad choice. People make bad choices sometimes.
I love the
Children
line that
make
you
bad
said,
choices sometimes.
it's how you recover.
Everything is about how you come back, and we talk about that as being your character. Everyone makes mistakes. You will make them in the future. And I'll say that this is a sneak preview of your life. You will make a mistake again. But how you are interacting with other people and the decisions you make in response and recovering, that's what builds your character. So we try to model that for our kids and for the adults as well. And then check in on them within a couple of days to make sure that they do feel like they're settled back in. Depending on what happened, it could be a check-in a few hours later. We really set it up. And in those re-entry meetings, it's the student is coming back in, and before they go to class, their parent is coming in, could be both parents if they're available. I'm typically in there, the assistant principal is running the meeting, and it's a social worker, psychologist, whoever's working with them, and a guidance counselor saying, this is your team. When you need an out, when you need to come and talk about it, the people at this table are the ones who are advocating for you, fighting for you, and want you to be successful. So you're coming and we'll make a plan for when they check in. That's really important.
And I have to say, especially the little kids, and I don't know, I'm sure the older ones too, they kind of light up. They're shocked that they're not in trouble. This kid especially had a look like, wait, you're all here for me? Like when Mrs. Horowitz showed up, he was like, gave me a look like I'm in trouble. And she's talking to him like, well, no, I'm here to help you. And Miss LaGuardia, no, we're here to help you. It was this whole like, I thought they were all gonna yell at me, and they're not. So there's a whole different, right?
Yeah, and we do use it, especially, on all the lower level things also. So, like Dr. Bear said, pushing somebody at the elementary school when you get angry is fairly developmentally appropriate, right? Like, it's like they get really mad really quick and they push someone down. But we'll handle that with a restorative. It might be during recess. They might have lunch with me while we have that conversation. So is there a little bit of like a consequence built in? You know, yes, they're having lunch with me, but it's talking about, what did you feel? How did that happen? What could you do different next time? How do you feel about, you know, what do you think your friend was feeling at that moment? What do you think we could do to make this better? And like, oftentimes they will come say, yeah, wow, I should really draw them a picture, write them a note, you know, say I'm sorry, and then you help facilitate that. So it's showing them that there is a consequence to their behavior. They have to face it. They have to take accountability for it. Oftentimes that's a lot harder than me just saying, go sit in the office tomorrow during recess, and then on Thursday you can go back. You know, that's a lot.
That's
actually
easier,
a lot easier
less time.
than sitting with me, having that conversation, reflecting, you know, because we're not letting them off the hook when they say, I don't know. It's like, well, we got time. Let's come up with some reasons, you know.
We can
And
have lunch tomorrow, too.
Really getting them to think about how they were feeling, what went wrong, what strategy could have worked, you know. So in some ways it's actually much harder. It's a bigger consequence, even though but it's much more collaborative and connecting, and it shows that you care for them. It shows that the school is a safe place where people are going to take time to talk about it. Sometimes it does unravel to them saying, I had a terrible morning and I was in, like it creates an opportunity where there might have been something else going on for a kid that we weren't aware of.
Yeah, and sometimes they end up wanting to come back. You know, to check in, you know, actually, I didn't mind talking to her. Can I talk to Mrs. Horwitz today? I had something this morning, you know?
They feel heard. They feel heard and valued.
Running late, but Ms. Brooks, did you have anything you wanted to?
I was just wondering, with any of the suspensions, and I don't know if we've had, because you don't have a recidivist in your classroom now. So I was just wondering, with any of the suspensions, sorry, it's my criminal background, sorry.
I heard it.
I was on the public defender, so sorry, with children, by the way. I was just wondering, and maybe we don't have enough of a time frame or time span, but do you find that the major infractions are one-offs, or is there, do you find that there are students who are coming back more frequently as recidivists, repeat offenders, I don't know what you want to call it, or do you find that this is working?
So this is still pretty new, and I'll speak at the high school level because typically at a high school level, we would have more suspensions than an elementary level. It depends on what behaviors we're talking about. So certainly we know that vaping is an issue in high schools across the country, probably across the world right now. So when we're looking at some of the bathroom vaping behaviors, we're trying to address that from a substance use standpoint and trying to work on a balance of exclusionary practices to address the behavior versus we need you to be in class, so we are walking you to class and making sure you're not stopping at the bathroom on the way. When we're talking about the more egregious behaviors that might be physical contact, over the 2.5 years that I've been here, I will say anecdotally that has decreased. So thinking about my first year, we did have a few instances of physical fights. We did have some instances last year that we tried to address really firmly, really quickly, and make sure that we were monitoring some of the situations that, as I had mentioned before, it wasn't just that physical fight, it was all of the things leading up to it. So it was an opportunity for the team to say, we know that these are some of the indicators that something is brewing. We need to make sure that we're addressing it prior to that. Does that make sense? So as we go over time, we'll be able to use I still call it VADR because I think it's funny, Violence and Disruptive Incidents Report, to make sure that we're seeing the data trend in the correct direction.
It's still early, though.
It is early.
It is early.
It's very
That's why I
early.
preface it by saying.
Well, that was actually my question, so there's that. And first to Sandra and then to the community.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, the circle. So I have two quick questions. One was kind of asked. Also, I'm going to preface, I have a lot of feelings on restorative practice, so I'm not going to even go there. But one big thing that kept this is not my question, this is just a thought that keeps going on in my mind, is harm done by whom? So a lot of this, and for me, this is really first step. I know that this has been worked on a lot, but this is really first step in my mind for Port Washington to be with the times, is the restorative practice to an individual student who does something against code of conduct, right? That's in my mind of the first step for restorative practice, but there's a lot of other harm that's not getting addressed with these steps, which I understand is like future, but just keep in mind, that's really where I'm like really weary of sometimes with restorative practices and when it's discussed, because there's been a lot of harm done to marginalized groups, and is why some of the things that they do, but that isn't work done. But again, baby steps, I understand. So really for this type of restorative practice, for me, this is the goal, to keep students in classroom. So that's the only thing that I see this goal is to keep a student in the classroom. So with that in mind, I know we asked about like effectiveness, but then you kind of hit on the data. So my only thing that I'd be looking for the future is what data are we looking at about students staying in a classroom? And I see your triangle upside down. I feel that suspension rates is the first thing that we're looking at, because that's the biggest thing. But then the question would be is once that is getting better, what are we looking at next as far as in-school detentions? And then the next level in really elementary school, because you're not at those suspension rates, and I don't know if Infinite Campus can help with this. I don't even know on a principal level if this is even options. But for me, on these keep the student in the classroom, how many timeouts are we giving? How many pullouts are we giving? How many reflection times are we giving that these students are losing classroom time? But with the mindset of like, yes, we are working on restorative practice, that child didn't get a suspension. But like you said, even though it's like a consequence, even though it was a time to reflect, that students getting pulled out of the classroom. So that would just be something that I'd look at of what data, I know you can do anecdotal, but like what data can be shown to the community, to the board, to the administration, that any sort of practices on the secondary and in elementary are actually hitting those steps of keeping a student in the classroom.
What I will say to that is the sole goal is not just keeping them in the classroom. It is really developing and nurturing a more connected community. Earlier at the beginning of the year, Dr. Hines shared to the staff at the convocation the disconnect students are feeling, especially as they exit the elementary schools and get into the secondary schools. So these practices, yes, they will keep kids in classes, right, if done the right way, which will lead, if they're in the class, they're going to have better academic performance and better academic outcomes. But more importantly, the process and the practices are about developing a stronger community. So you feel like you've got a safe place, you feel like you can connect. There are adults you've connected to, and it's that sense of belonging that's critical. So our climate survey, we would hope to see as these roll out. And I've said it to staff and teachers, we're not getting rid of ruler at the elementary level. We are committed to ruler in our elementary schools. These restorative practices complement and can be used with ruler, but at the secondary level where we're struggling, really haven't really implemented ruler, this is where restorative practices are really going to shine. And I think we will see greater connection and a greater sense of belonging, as well as fewer days outside of the classroom.
So possibly one data that could be shown to us would be the continued use of surveys and panorama of that connectedness. Reporting. So a big thing with the harm is it's easy enough for on certain types of harm that an adult notice it, right? An adult notice an aggression, and that would be the harm. An adult noticed if a student was disruptive, that student is being disruptive, then that's the harm he or she is doing to the whole classroom, to the teacher, so on. With the reporting, DASA was brought up. I'm just wondering what level we are as a district moving forward with a reporting mechanism for students when they feel harmed, but they don't know how to express that. Something maybe an adult didn't notice. The video you showed was an example. That girl was getting her, her detentions, but the teacher didn't notice she was getting bullied.
Yeah.
I know that the first way I know is when the adults are connected to the students and they have a connected adult they can speak, if someone has a really great relationship with you, they can obviously go to you and tell you that harm that was done. But, right now, the only thing that I've ever seen for us is reported on our website, and that's not for elementary, that's very specific, that's very hard to use. So that's just one thing is like, what are the reporting mechanisms that we see for these students that do feel harmed? Social media is a big use now with students feeling that they were harmed. They themselves might be harmed, not say anything, they don't go to classroom, right? So this is one of those things where I'm just wondering, where are our reporting mechanisms for the students, for the families even? This student, they were maybe enough that you noticed the phallic syndrome, right? But had that parent that had a student and not been comfortable to call you or something, is there these reporting mechanisms in place where parents can, and students really express those? And again, I think we have only reported, and it's only in the secondary, but nothing at the elementary, unless there's something in elementary that I don't know about, which there could be, but that's really just like the reporting of the harms is my next, like, where is those mechanisms?
So I think what you're saying, at some point, somebody has to report it. So at the high school level, we will get different types of reported. So it could be an action, it could be behavior. We did get something where you can now upload a video. So a kid took a video of something that was happening outside from one table in the front circle to another, and we were able to address it that way. But at some point, someone will need to share something. I can tell you at the high school, we've also started doing CST, which is a child study team. This is where if someone is noticing a change of behavior, and this could be suddenly starting to skip class, it could be different mannerisms in class, they were chatty and talkative and now all of a sudden they're quiet and reserved. Could be I'm noticing maybe they're going from an A to a C, which is not failing, but that's a pretty significant, a 2-letter grade drop. Something is going on. So that would get on our indicator that we need to touch base with that student. So whether it's a social worker, psychologist, counselor, is having a conversation to, hey, we're noticing this, what's going on? So at some point, if we're noticing a behavior, we're creating that one-to-one contact to check in and monitoring.
But I think to your point, right, we're not gonna be able to see everything. And if students are feeling more connected to the school and to the adults, they will, K-12, feel more able to say, hey, this is happening. And it's the same with the parents as well. And this can happen. In my previous district, as we were rolling this out, I had an 8 through 12 school, and we had some 11th and 12th grade students who were concerned about some of the behavior of the 8th graders, stuff they were yelling in the hallway that was offensive to their religion. And adults were not hearing it. These students brought it to the person who was leading a lot of our restorative work, and we were able to do a circle with those students leading the way. It was early in our process. We told the parents what we were going to do. They needed to be comfortable, and it's effective. If students know there's a safe place to go where they can do it, and a place where it's not going to just get dismissed, that's part of creating this culture of care. Restorative justice uses that term all the time, culture of care, and that's what we're looking to build.
Denise?
I have a question about how Tier 1 is implemented in the high school. Because I know that there are a lot of, circle time and things like that happens at the elementary school. And my sense is that Ruler is the SEL program for all 5 elementaries. But then once we get to middle school, my sense is it's restorative practices. But especially at the high school, our circle was great, but it took a while. So I'm just wondering how that actually happens in a high school class, especially in the upper level classes, they move sort of quickly.
That's a great question. So keeping in mind that we're still new to this, we do have a number of people who have been trained, and I've been touching base with teachers who are part of the training and how they're using it in their classroom. So sometimes it's as quickly as when you're first coming into the room, before you sit down, we're doing just a really quick check-in. So you saw that our check out was just one word. It's a way to get everybody's voice in the room. It's a way to really get it started. There are academic versions of these circles, so it can still be used while you are teaching the content. So it's, again, building that capacity, developing that muscle. It's not happening in every classroom. I will tell you right now that it's not. We had a high school teacher we had hoped would be able to be here today. Unfortunately, we couldn't work out the schedule. He is an E&L teacher who is using it constantly, almost every day in his classroom as part of, it could be, let's talk about this topic and getting an answer from everybody in the circle. So it doesn't just have to be, let's stop what we're doing. Some of these pacing calendars for an AP, they're fast. Right. We start school in New York State later than other places in the country. So these are some of the things that we've been talking about with the teachers. Is it doesn't need to be a stop what you're doing, do something totally different, and then go back to it like that didn't exist. It's how you can really weave it in a way that makes sense. In a humanities class, for example, there are more natural and organic opportunities to bring that in. Talk about a Socratic method when you're doing a discussion-based course. In some of our STEM classes, it can be a little bit more challenging, but there are still opportunities to do it. And I'm sure Dr. Feeney
There
can
are
give
hundreds of
examples as
different
well.
prompts, so it
Yes.
gets used. But we had 3 prompts. We committed, nobody was familiar. You have to imagine, hey, beginning of the school year, let's do one quick one. You develop the habit so that when there really is a need to address something, you've got that skill. These are learned skills, so it makes a difference.
And we have also used it in a classroom setting when something happened and we need to reestablish the norms and the expectations in that room and kind of change up the chemistry and the interactions that the students are having. So we've had assistant principals go in and do this alongside the teachers to kind of reshape what that learning environment looks like. So on both sides, academic and from a social emotional aspect, we will get better.
I think, were you and I at Schreiber last year, and we saw this happening in an ENL classroom? They were passing something along. It's the first time I'd ever seen it, and I don't know what the object was. It was.
I was there for that one too.
You were
I was
there?
wondering if it was the same one.
Yes, and then and they were talking about genocide.
Right, it was
Right?
a social
Oh, this
studies
was
class.
social study. I know the class you're talking about. That teacher we were hoping would come.
And it was, yes, I kind of figured that. And we saw, I didn't know what it was. I couldn't appreciate it. But every student was given the opportunity to respond to the prompt. And this object, I don't know what it was passed amongst them, all around everybody. Everybody had to speak, or they were saying, pass, whatever it was. But I saw it, yeah. And I thought, wow, this is just unbelievable because everybody had the opportunity. It was a difficult subject. Everybody had the opportunity to be seen, be heard, be patient with everybody. I walked out and I said, wow, what did I just see? I didn't even know what it was.
Similar.
So what I will say at Weber is the initial training we did last year included a lot of Weber administrators, teachers. However, the training happened to take place when there were a lot of other issues happening at Weber, and they got pulled out of those trainings. So I am happy that this year we had a lot of people at Weber. The one that just finished yesterday was dominated by Weber and Schreiber teachers. So we have a lot of Weber, and this is going to get rolled out at Weber. Weber had some issues last year.
Jess? My question was specifically about Weber, and we tend to hear a lot often about elementary level and high school, but Weber kind of gets a little lost sometimes. And as we all know, it's a particularly fraught developmentally, socially, it's a fraught time. So I was also just wondering if there's anything specific, any unique opportunities or challenges that can be addressed at Weber through Tier 1 approaches. My mind goes to time like core extension, where yes, there are many teachers have curriculum in core extension. Some may or may not, but that's time. There seems to be time built into the Weber schedule that would allow for this in different ways than perhaps it does at Schreiber.
We had a lot, as I said, a lot of Weber teachers just finished the 2-day training. They'll be able to roll it out. And it's got the support of the administration, and the APs were there for Weber. So this is going to get out there in Weber as well.
Jess, did you have your hand up?
No, those are my questions.
Anybody I missed? Okay, well, as usual, we've run past our time again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is on December 13th, and it is about data at Schreiber. We get to see Dr. Bear again.
Well, we'll also have some elementary folks too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.